So next talk will be by Dr. Krishna Ravi Srinivas from RIS, Research and Information Systems for Developing Countries, and we invite you for the talk.
Just adjust the mic. Yeah. Fine. Good afternoon, everyone, and I thank the Sarai for giving me this opportunity. Basically, I am from RIS. RIS is a policy think tank with Ministry of External Affairs. We work a lot on science, technology, innovation, particularly governance of emerging technologies and all. So now the question is, we talk of responsible AI, but if you look at it, responsible AI is only one of the things, and the question here is, there are same questions arises in other emerging technologies, whether it's talk of human genome editing, or you talk of synthetic biology or biotechnology, or for that matter any emerging technology. The question of responsibility is always there. The sense that we talk of how do we responsibly use upcoming innovations, whatever the field you are talking of. It could be anything, whether particularly when the technoscience is taking over life sciences and everything, and particularly genome editing, synthetic biology also open up a lot of dual use concerns as well as other concerns. So responsibility and responsible application of technology has become the core, in the sense that you cannot talk of technology and society without understanding what do you mean by responsibility, and then how do you responsibly handle innovation in science and technology. There are many ways to approach these questions, in the sense that there are a couple of frameworks, there are a couple of ideas that have been discussed about it. I will highlight only two approaches which are quite important here. These two approaches which I am going to talk of, some of the things which we have been working on also for quite some time. One is that, when you talk of responsibility, it is not just you talk of responsibility in the end or the innovation. You have to talk of responsibility right in the beginning, that is right from the or side of it. So there is a framework, there is a concept and practice which has been promoted and endorsed by the European Commission. It is called Responsible Research and Innovation, RRI. It is called shortly as RRI. Basically, the idea behind RRI is to ensure that what the research and innovation gives to society is what the society needs most, and the gap between society and the scientists and the technocrats and developers is reduced by fostering trust, by fostering credibility, as well as ensuring that there's a dialogue, understanding, and mutual respect and trust. So how do you go about it? These are not just words. So there are a couple of keys which the RRI principles have identified. One of them is very important, which is ethics first. Second is public engagement. Third is gender. Gender is very critical because time and again you look at it, whether it is AI or computer science and technology or any emerging technology, gender is very important because women's participation is low, and that is one area where we need to do a lot of things, whether it is in STEM or anywhere else. And then fourth comes science education or science communication with the public. This is also very important because what happens is that public should not see science and innovation more as something that provides them a lot of blockbusters and then a lot of things which they can play around with, but they should also understand, appreciate why this is happening. So unless the public understands the science, unless the public has a better understanding, and science communication should help us in that, the trust question will always be a key factor again and again. Public cannot be expected that they will trust everything and whatever you offer. Something which goes wrong here, something which goes wrong there, then it becomes a problematic aspect. So these are the 4 or 5 keys which RRI principles say that if you want to do something responsible research and innovation, please pay attention to them. And of course, there are a lot of guidelines, there are many ways of doing it. We ourselves have been working on some of the things like that. And this is foregrounded on 2 very key norms. One is anticipation, second is reflexivity. Anticipation tells you whether you do it in lab or whether you do it elsewhere, you anticipate. You plan for something, that doesn't mean that you know everything. So you anticipate that could be some unanticipated consequences, which means that you be aware of your knowns, you be aware of your unknowns, you also be aware of the unknown unknowns, the unknowable unknowns when you plan for something, which means that you have to really figure out what could be the potential risk which could happen. But there are a lot of gaps in your understanding of the everything. So be aware what you really do not know, and you should also be knowing that what you may not even know that you do not know. So anticipation takes you to get a 360 perspective of what you are doing, where your understanding lies, and what could be the potential pitfalls in your understanding, so that you know that, okay, I'm not very certain about it. Then how do I go about it? Do I take a very precautionary approach when it comes to that innovation and development, and then say, I step back twice, reflect upon it, and then I say, oh, this is where I have figured out, I have missed out something important, but then I have not looked at it in the first place. So I think about it again, I then retrace my steps, and then I say, this is the step where I should have not have done, but I could go back and then set it right. So anticipation is one, and then reflexivity is another principle. Reflexivity tells you, you reflect upon not just what you know, what has been your experience, but in the broader context also. So when we talk of anticipation and reflexivity, anticipation, they are complementary to each other. You reflect upon what you already know from anticipation, and then what you know from reflexivity feeds into your anticipation perspective. So RRA perspective is one which tells you very clearly, look, if you are going to do anything in emerging technologies, adopt the RRA framework, that is response, precision, innovation. And then innovation comes after the research. So you start RRA framework right from the beginning, right from the planning stage, which means that you upfront foreground ethics, you upfront bring in public engagement. You also talk of science communication, and you also talk of bringing in gender over there. And then RRA frameworks, these 4 or 5 keys are there, but we know that these are not simply keys which you simply exist in high air and then you talk in merely in terms of that. We need to translate them into practice. So how do you go about it? In some of the projects which are related to European brain experiments, they have understood these things and then they have been trying with these things. And in some of the ways that genome editing, there has been huge call for public engagement, and then there's also an observatory, Human Genome Observatory, which maps these things. So public engagements doesn't mean that you do only surveys and public opinion. Public engagements, it cuts both ways. You learn from the public, you do a lot of science engagement with the public. By talking to them, you don't simply communicate. By talking to them in terms that you try to understand them also as well. It is not that public doesn't know or public is fear of something because of ignorance. It is not. There is deep underlying values and principles which public wants to communicate to you, but they may not be the phrases or the choice phrases of which you know. They may be talking in their own fears and anxieties and understandings in a very different way. So public understanding and public engagement are two very critical whenever you talk of any emerging technology. So RRA framework is one key framework which can be beautifully deployed for responsible AI. Only thing is that we need to do some case studies, we need to do some concrete examples. Okay, when we develop this application, how do we go about RRA principles? How do we talk about anticipation that? What do we mean by reflexivity in that? How do we bring in ethics into it? How do we talk of public engagement? And then where do we bring in gender into it? So this is one framework which I think CEROI can really adopt, and we will be glad to work on it because we have been part of 4 international projects on response, precision, innovation. And one of the things which I don't have time to talk about is the concept which we have been doing also is called social labs. Social labs also gives an idea that you encourage dialogue, you work with the whole set of stakeholders on an ongoing basis and then develop certain things, simulate certain things, and then take their perspective and then reflect upon and then develop it further. I can explain them later, but for the time being, I'll stop with that. The second perspective which RIS has developed to understand or to evaluate any science, technology, innovation is called AEA framework. The AEA framework says to understand the impacts of science, technology or any innovation, we need to go beyond the typical cost-benefit analysis. We need to go beyond the typical traditional approaches. We need to figure in 3 major values: access, equity and inclusion. Now, if your innovation ultimately results in better access and that to an equitable access and that is inclusive, then that is an innovation that the society can be really, which would need. And then that could be something which is also very responsible. So when we talk of access, equity and inclusion, we have to look at the way things can go wrong in terms of inequitable distribution. The inequitable distribution can also be not because of the problem, but because of the way things have been done. For example, we all know that whether it is in clinical trials or some of the data collection or some of the ways experiments are being done, certain sections of the population are being left out, or what is gathered as reliable evidence may not be fully reliable because of exclusions in the right from the data collection itself. So here we bring in that equity should be the cornerstone. Access, equity, and inclusion, you need to bring them together to develop a framework. So we figure that when we say equity and inclusion, they go together. And then access also means that the products or the services that become outcome of that should be easily accessible, affordable, and how do we ensure that? It's a different question. That also means that the way the society should benefit from the innovation should also be a factor in that. So I submit that SEROI can use these two frameworks very profitably in one sense and very conveniently in other sense, because these are something which we can easily do. RRA, there are a lot of case studies which have been done, when we ourselves have done a case study of how RRA can be used in agricultural biotechnology. People have written about in very specific nanotechnology, particularly nanotoxicology, like how RRA has helped people to identify certain problems in nanotoxicology and then overcome them. Also in human brain mapping, particularly in the human brain project in Europe. And then AIA framework, we have done a small case study using some econometrics data that we have not fully developed further. It is in different stages of conceptual as well as further development. So I submit that establishment of SEROI at IITM is a very good thing because it brings in interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary one. RRI is a policy think tank. RIS is a policy think tank which works on emerging technologies. We also do a lot of other work in other areas that relate to commerce as well as economics. And the other hat I wear is I also am adjunct professor at Nalsar University of Law at Hyderabad, where I also look into AI and law. In the sense we have started looking in AI and law, particularly in application justice, using AI for translation of judgments and a couple of other applications. So I am quite sure that both RIS and Nalsar will be able to work with SEROI, and then it will be a mutually beneficial one. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Krishna Srinivas. So I request Dr. Harish to hand over a memento to. Yeah.